the shadow dragon. I'm the shadow dragon of the night. I only come out in the midnight. You might say I come out in the midnight, but I also come out when you see the daylight. I'm the daylight dragon. I'm the daylight dragon of the midnight. I'm the daylight dragon of the midnight. I'm the daylight dragon. Daylight dragon. Daylight of the dragon. I'm the daylight dragon of the night. I'm the daylight dragon. I'm the daylight dragon. I'm the daylight dragon of the moonlight. I'm the daylight dragon of the moonlight. I'm the daylight dragon of the moonlight of the night. I'm the daylight dragon of the moonlight. I'm the daylight dragon. I'm the daylight dragon. I'm the daylight moonlight dragon. I'm the daylight moonlight dragon. I'm the daylight moonlight dragon of the night, of every night, of every daylight, of every daylight. I summon the daylight tonight. You might say it sounds like a roaring thunderstorm, a roaring thunderstorm. I summon the daylight. I summon the moonlight. I'm the daylight dragon of the moonlight. I'm the daylight dragon of the moonlight. I'm the daylight dragon. Daylight dragon. I'm the daylight dragon of the moonlight tonight. I'm the daylight dragon. 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 I'm the daylight dragon.